Welcome everyone to this afternoon or this evening's keynote for Wednesday at JupyterCon 2020. We're pleased to welcome Omoju Miller. Omoju is a technical advisor to the CEO at GitHub, where she was previously a senior machine learning engineer. She has a PhD in computer science education from UC Berkeley and a master's degree in intelligent systems from the University of Memphis. When she was a PhD candidate, Omoju worked at Google, co-leading the nonprofit computer science education portfolio and helping launch several initiatives, including Made with Code, a program aimed at increasing the participation of girls in computing. She was also a member of a team that won a White House hackathon on data and education, the Education Datapalooza, and later had the opportunity to advise the Presidential Innovation Fellows Initiative on aspects of diversity and inclusion. And we're very happy to hear from her this afternoon. Take it away, Omoju.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. So let's see how I do this. All right, here I'm going. Share. Sorry. There I go. All right, can everybody see my screen? I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Great. So
we can see your screen. Did you want to make your slides full screen or just keep them in the middle?
I want to make my slides full screen. Okay, sorry. Let me go back and exit out. Oh my God. All right.
There we go. Now they're full screen.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you all for inviting me. Now we're going. Sorry, bear with me all. I have my speaker notes and I want to make sure that, can you see my speaker notes?
Yes, we can see your speaker notes.
We can see them now, but a moment ago we couldn't.
So let's stop sharing and let's try to do this again. Hold on a second. We will do this again and we will do this the right way. Well, okay, here we go. Yes, all right, well, we'll have to go with this. I will make my screen, we'll make it full screen. What is going on? There, finally, let's do this.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you all for inviting me to JupyterCon. I have been using Project Jupyter for the last 10 years, and I started using it when it was called IPython. And today I wanted to talk to you all about science in the age of data, specifically around accelerating human progress. From the 14th century to the 14th century to the 16th and 17th century, humanity went through this radical transformation, the scientific revolution, from Copernicus to Newton. And what was interesting about the scientific revolution was the fact that it was the scientific method that they used. And so let's go ahead and actually talk a little bit about the scientific method. To start off with, scientific revolution was not necessarily something that had started happening in the 14th century. It always existed, but it happened in small little pockets. And using the scientific method, for example, people would see an observation, they'll have a question about that observation, they'll make a hypothesis, and once they make the hypothesis, they'll run a couple of experiments. And once they gather the information from these experiments, they'll do some analysis and they will publish their analysis. And the most important aspect of it was having that application, whatever it was, if it's a book or something, be out there so people can go back and forth and have argumentation, whether supporting the findings or refuting the findings. And going through the cycle over and over again, this is the way that new knowledge was unearthed. But what made the scientific revolution, well, really revolutionary was not necessarily using the scientific method. People had been using the scientific method. It had been happening in pockets here and there. What made it revolutionary was the technology, and it was the sheer scale of it, aided by technology. And the technology that made this possible was the printing press. And just like the printing press, we continued on, things continued on. By the end of the scientific revolution, we had Charles Babbage create his analytical engine. And so now the kinds of questions we could ask was getting very different. We had some form of computation. And continuing on in that same vein, by the 1930s, Conrad Zuse had created this first digital kind of computer, the Z1. And so all of this added together to change the kinds of questions that we could actually ask, because now we had devices that could help with computation. And so the interesting thing, the thing I never mentioned before when I was speaking about the scientific method is that first, let's actually take a step back and ask ourselves, why do we even engage in science? And the reason why we engage in science is because we want to know about the natural world around us. The scientific process is a way of us understanding the natural world all around us. Through this cycle, one thing that is there that is not represented here is information and information flow processes. What we are actually doing in understanding the natural world is going through observation and studying the stimulus response systems of the things that we're trying to measure, that we're trying to understand, and we derive knowledge from watching all of those things. Whether the scientist knows it or not, or even whether they're aware of it, computation is a part of the entire process, to the point that some have suggested that we add data-intensive computing as a part of the scientific method. And this, when I talk about data-intensive computing, I'm talking about working with massive scales of data, often petabytes and exabytes of data. And what has made this easier for us to do now, because information and information processes is part of the entire thing. What has made this very interesting for us to do at this point in time is the creation of tools that have allowed us to move this thing forward. Just as we had the scientific revolution that was aided by technology, in the modern era, the kinds of questions we can ask is also aided by technology. And I want to start off with something that I started using early on. I mean, not in 1984, but once I started my career, I started off using MATLAB. And MATLAB existed in 1984. People were using it, but still it was going okay. And then by 1995, Numeric existed, which is a package that allows you to do array algebra. Then life continued, nothing really major happened. And then 2010, I would say 2010 is a major milestone year for the world of data-intensive computing, because out of Google's Summer of Code, the Python package scikit-learn was created. So by the early 90s, Guido van Rossum had created Python, and people then started building on top of Python to do scientific computing, doing data work. That same year, 2010, saw the invention of pandas and also the invention of Kaggle, the data science competition website. And what I think is probably one of the biggest one, NumPy, which allows us to do tensor arithmetic, tensor algebra even faster. And what I think everybody here is interested in, which brings us all together, the creation of IPython. 2010, IPython was created out of UC Berkeley, coincides with the same time that I started my doctoral program at Berkeley. A major milestone happened the year after in 2011 with the Stanford AI MOOC, which is the massive open online course. Heretofore, people who engage mostly in this kinds of question and answer for the kind of research that require this massive amounts of data, these were often PhD students or scientists that had doctoral degrees, and there were PIs and there were leading labs. For the first time, people could take classes without having to be part of a graduate program and learn how to use those tools at scale. And what we started seeing was that people who are taking these classes were now participating in Kaggle, and they were now winning those competitions. So science had slowly started breaking out of the academy. The same year, the programming language Julia was created, as well as one of the first major deep learning packages, Theano. The year after that was another major milestone because at Google, Andrew Ying had trained this neural network on all these images on YouTube. And back then, this was like a huge deal because it's the amount of data he was able to put through the neural network was incredible. It had never occurred before. And what was interesting was that the neural network that they built was able to recognize cats. I think that everybody just went crazy, like, whoa. And as often happens in the world of artificial intelligence, people were like, oh my God, we just built this system. It's going to gain sentience and all this kind of stuff. Well, none of that happened, but we were able to do a neural network that was able to recognize cats. Another deep learning package came out, Cafe. And then Andrew Ying and Daphne Koller went and created Coursera, which allowed even more people to enter scientific computing, and they didn't have to come from the academy. Not to be outdone, another company was created also out of Silicon Valley, Udacity, by Sebastian Throng. Also the same kind of thing, getting knowledge of machine learning outside of the academy. The following year, XGBoost, gradient boosting, occurred, and once XGBoost package was out there, pretty much at that point in time, almost every Kaggle competition was won by XGBoost. And then following year, there was the creation of Spacey, which helped do NLP work even better. Then Tesseract for OCR recognition, and then TensorFlow. I would say TensorFlow was a major landmark because it allowed people to gain access to the package that Google was using internally so they could start applying it to their own work. Around the same kind of time, IPython rolled into Jupyter based on on Julia, Python, and R. And so Project Jupyter was now a thing. And after that, Facebook created its own work with PyTorch, and FastAI was created, which was founded by Jeremy Howard and Rachel Thomas. And Jeremy gave a keynote recently, like 2 days ago. The reason why this data-intensive milestones and tools, I went through this timeline, is to show that as we're doing this scientific process, the technologies that have been created to allow the kinds of questions that we can ask to change, a lot of these technologies happened in the open. There were things that came out of open source technologies. And you've all seen this image. In recent years, a lot of major milestones that has occurred in science has, from the Higgs boson to this image of the black hole, has come out of open source technology. So when this occurred, this was the image seen all around the world. And we at GitHub were also very curious about this image because we know that a lot of the work that happened to make this occur happened in a distributed fashion in open source and rested on scientific Python. And a lot of those packages were actually part of the open source communities on GitHub. So we did a little bit of work to actually see how many people had to come together to make this occur. And when we did that, we found that it was over 21,000 contributions. Over 21,000 people contributed to those Python packages that allowed this work to happen. It was very, very interesting for us because it showed that the power of open source has allowed us to even move further into the kinds of things we can accomplish as humanity. And sometimes you think that perhaps that Event Horizon Telescope project of Dr. Katie Bowman is an outlier. That most projects, most software projects, will not be the creation of over 21,000 people. That will be smaller teams. But what we're seeing is that is not the case. We were also very interested in finding the answer to that question. So we did our work at GitHub and we sampled the top 1,000 open source projects and did below the waterline to actually see how many people contributed to the dependencies that rolled up into the packages that created each of those projects. And we found something remarkable. We found that on average, it was over 74,000 people. So open source is the work of all of us. And now bringing it back to science, doing science in the age of data. If we go back at the very beginning, science was something that was done in small pockets around the world with small sets of people, and it was extremely exclusive. Through the scientific revolution, the knowledge of science started to become disseminated further and wider. It was still very much exclusive. Women were not even allowed to participate in science back then because once science entered the universities, women were not allowed to go to the universities. They were being pushed out of it. To all the way till today, the science that we've all grown up doing, the science that we've looked upon, the things that happened at NASA, these things were still behind gated walls. But now we are in an age where we can do science in the open and the permissions are no longer, the system is becoming slowly permissionless, where if I am not a professor, I can actually help build the tools that the scientists use. And through that, I can start to participate in the science. It's remarkable what has happened in the last 20 years with regard to open source. And that is what has allowed all this to occur. 20 years ago, this was a quote that I pulled out from Tim O'Reilly's talk in 1998. The quote goes, "A year ago, if you had asked the IS manager at a large company about free software, he'd have told you he didn't use it. It's unsupported," he might have said, "not robust enough, and not commercial quality." Well, 20 years hence, or 22 years hence, open source has gone from the fringe to the mainstream. And open source has actually won. And through doing work in the open, it has helped us to actually accelerate human progress. What we've learned is that open source is reliable. It is small pieces loosely coupled together. These open source modular technologies have so much redundancy built in. These are the tools that we built the modern web. These are the tools that help us build the internet. And today, 90% of Fortune 500 companies use open source in their technology stack. And the interesting thing about it is that that open source stack that they're using is a lot of it also has to do with open source software that came out of scientific computing. Many companies today are using TensorFlow. They're using Jupyter notebooks to talk about the things that they're building. They're using all these different tools, PyTorch, and they're building commercially viable applications. when we think about this, you probably are not thinking about it in terms of they are doing science, but they are. The only difference is that on the same platform where science is done through those tools, the science that we do now has some artifacts that have value, and we can then use those artifacts to work in commercial environments. And those commercial environments, in turn, build better tools for us to be able to ask a different question of the science. One of the other things that the IS manager that Tim O'Reilly spoke to in 1998 was the fact that open source was not supported. And it has been the case. Usually, if there was a great open source package that came out of a university, it might have been the creation of a graduate student. And while the graduate student is doing his doctoral work, that package gets maintained. When that student leaves the university, what often occurs is they either go on to become a professor or they go on into industry and they stop maintaining that package. Well, now, recently, last year, GitHub stepped in and created the GitHub Sponsors Project, which is a project that allows us peer-to-peer sponsorships that allows all of us to maintain open source by funding the maintainers and creators of open source. I think of this as an extremely revolutionary feature that we've brought to the marketplace in terms of its role in creating and maintaining open science. If you're using Jupyter notebooks, more than likely you fall into a segment that probably has advanced degrees. And so you're probably used to things like writing a grant and working and doing your science within the context of a university. With a thing perhaps like GitHub Sponsors, one could see how science funding can actually bypass that system and go straight to the consumers of science to fund science. I think of this as a truly revolutionary thing, like a citizen-funded science, and this platform can help us do that. What makes open source unique isn't that the software is free. That is amazing, but what makes it truly, truly unique and what has made it successful is the fact that there is an architecture of participation. And when I talk about architecture of participation, I'm talking about a clear way of bringing outsiders into your community. Often what will occur is a project will exist, people are interested in that project, and the project is a very small community. Maybe they have a mailing list, and you find that mailing list, you write to the mailing list, and you start to do the engagement through the mailing list. Open source projects have had to work in a distributed fashion, in an online fashion for 20-something years. So they've built a solid architecture of participation. And science as a community can learn a lot from open source by doing something very similar. Science might seem so far out of reach of a lot of people. And the reason why it is because we don't actually have an architecture of participation. If I'm interested in working, for example, on the Hubble telescope, and there's lots of open source packages on that telescope, or there is need of people rendering images, finding different kinds of things. As a software engineer, I might have the skills to be able to do that, but I don't know how to onboard into that project. I don't know what kind of questions they're asking. And these are all the things that if we built a clear system of like contribution guidelines and a way to bring outsiders in, we can actually accelerate human progress even further. We're beginning to see scientific communities start to build this architecture of participation. One of the things that's most interesting about the science cycle that I showed at the very beginning that I did not point out is that last bit of argumentation where you present your findings. And for people to have a stance on what you found, it isn't enough for them to just read a paper and say, yes, this makes sense, I agree with it. For us to be able to agree with the findings of your paper, the best way to do that is through reproducible science. we have to reproduce your findings. And in the corner of the world where ML lives, people, they have created recently, I think it was this month, that on arXiv, there is now a code tab where you can associate a paper with the code itself that generated the findings of that paper. The next level would be to have the paper, the code, and the data sets associated together. But this is the start. My hope is that this bleeds out into all the other science. That it's no longer just something that machine learning does. It is something that biomolecular modeling should do. It's something that climate science should do. It's something that if you're doing work in bioinformatics, it's exactly the same thing that you should do. And talking about citizen science and architectures of participation and open sourcing your code to be able to replicate this. In this 2020 that we're living in, when the pandemic started in July or February, most people in the academy wanted to do their bit to jump in, to show, to use their skill set to actually help move things forward. One of the teams that did that was the Imperial College of London, the Global Infectious Disease team. They had a model of a simulation of how diseases spread in the system. And so what they did is took that piece of code, open sourced it, and then asked people, had their architecture of participation, and then you could then take this model, run it on the data set, and the data set was available to everybody. Most people were using the data set from Johns Hopkins, and you could build your own simulation and run it. And then you could decide for yourself what the impact of lockdown would be. So in this 21st century, we're beginning to see that through data-intensive computing, through open source tools, and through adopting doing science in the open, we are actually leveraging more and more of all of our talents to accelerate human progress and move humanity forward. And the last part that I want to talk about is the fact that Mark Andreessen has this thing where the statement that says that software is eating the world. I posit that data is eating science, because most of the science that we do, the way we learn about the natural world and understand what is going on, is about understanding the way information flows through complex systems. And some have even gone further to say this information flow systems, it's pretty much all over nature. We just haven't had the right tools to be able to measure it. For example, if you think about DNA and everything that happens at the DNA level, it's an information flow. And the thing about it is all of those sciences, whether it's biology, whether it's chemistry, whether it's physics, all of them are converging into a computational science. Everything ends up being gathering massive amounts of data, which means that if you're working at the petabyte or hexabyte level of data, it means that the scientist now has to become an infrastructure engineer. The scientist has to understand how to work with cloud computing. The scientist has to be able to write code and put things in a parallel system of going through Hadoop or going through MapReduce to actually do all their work. And so what we're beginning to see is science is becoming a hybrid discipline. And the challenge that we now have ahead of us is, how do we train future scientists to be able to do science better, with the understanding that they have to actually understand software engineering and data infrastructure. This is a question that I think about all the time. And I want to end by leaving that question open, especially to all of us to start thinking about, for anybody that writes science curriculum, that has students, that works with people, how do you bring data infrastructure and data engineering into your work and make sure that people have competency in that so they can ask even much more complex questions? That is my talk. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've seen how data is actually eating science and how everything is coming together to become a computational science. Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
And if you'd like, you can, turn back on your video.
Yes.
Questions, you can put questions in the Q&A here on the WebEx platform. We're monitoring the chat as well, the keynotes channel for the chat, for any questions from the audience. But I'll go ahead and start off with one. You mentioned we're sort of getting to the point where people are being open about not just writing a paper, but now there's a possibility to put code up on archive, but that's only a step towards data plus code plus explanation, etc. Do you have about how we get the rest of the way there?
I've been thinking about this, and I was thinking this is a utopian idea because most science still happens in a competitive fashion. There is a race towards being the team that solves this particular problem. You want to be the person that wins the Nobel Prize for CRISPR. Like you want to be associated with that milestone. Open science is antithetical to that. Because if you share everything, for example, an academic paper should actually not be a PDF. It shouldn't be some dead document. It should be a Jupyter notebook written in a literate programming fashion with prose explaining what you're going to do, pieces of code showing what you did, a data in some data vault that you can pull down on the things. It should be a living document that other people can fork it, extend it, so on and so forth. As long as science is done with the aim of being competitive and winning prizes, we're not going to get there. If science is done with the idea of accelerating human progress, then the incentives align and we can become much more open.
And do you have ideas for how to do that? That is, I think, spot on.
That I don't have any ideas of how we do that. Perhaps one of the things we can actually start thinking about is ultimately we do science because we want to understand the natural world. And as we go through the scientific process, we discover things, and the things that the artifacts of our investigation often have financial value. So maybe perhaps everybody that engages in that research program, which we actually can track if it's all online and it's done in the open, can have some kind of a joint share system where if you commercialize any piece of the software, a certain portion gets attributed to you. Just if it ever gets to be a commercially viable thing, then you know that, oh, this person opened a bunch of pull requests against this, fixed all these issues. So you have that documentation of the amount of work that the person did. And if the software becomes ever commercially viable, then the portion of their work, they can get some kind of money for it. I think that would be the way that we can do that. And we actually have technologies that allows that to occur right now, but it's a radical shift in the way you think about financial remuneration for work done in the open.
I love how you're also bringing in a lesson, like you pointed out with the GitHub sponsors program, a lesson you're learning from open source into the science atmosphere, which actually brings up a question from the audience. They say, I'm surprised that you said GitHub sponsors can replace scientific funding. Does that?
I didn't say replace. I did not say replace.
Okay.
I didn't say replace. Could be another source of scientific funding. And the source of scientific funding, like how many human beings are in the world? 7 billion. If 50,000 of us were interested in a specific part of the universe that we wanted to do explorations on, the first thing to do is come up with a course of study and how long is it going to take for us to study this and craft everything out. But even for you to do that, you need some mental space, you need some time. So perhaps we can fund that investigator for 6 months to put the study together. Like buy their time so they can actually put everything together. And then through all of us interested in that work, we will have networks, we'll have connections, we'll make things happen. It doesn't always have to be a government entity that you have to write a grant to and then wait for 10 months or whatever to answer back. And then, it's so slow, whereas we can actually all jump together and get something done faster. So I'm not saying replace, I'm saying, and in addition, this is another avenue that we could objectively go after to accelerate human progress.
How far do you think that would scale? Like, would it require large organizations? And going back to a second part of this question, are large organizations funding through GitHub sponsors? Do you think people could crowd fund really? Like, how big do you think this would scale?
I think it's up to how big our imaginations are. There's no limit on what your imagination is. If you can think it, it can happen. It just requires effort and persistence. Like, this is a revolutionary thing of when the printing press was created, it was revolutionary. The idea that you could print out books and average person could read it. Then this was like unheard of. You had to be part of the clergy. You had to be a monk in a monastery. That was the only person that was supposed to read the Bible. An average person should not be reading the Bible. And this occurred and the world did not end. So this might seem like insane and out of this world, but that's how we move humanity forward, by dreaming bigger and pushing for those dreams to become reality.
I really like that. A second question switches subjects a little bit. Speaking of openness and computational future, increasing accessibility for people, is GitHub working to get access to its repositories that are blocked, for example, by governments blocking access to the repositories?
GitHub works in the context of the American government, and they have to abide by the rules of the American government. But as one of the things that we do is make sure that we do everything we can to help move things forward and to help move things in an open direction. So I think there are certain things that are available right now that if they're not private, like they're public, I think some things are available.
Excellent. That is great to hear. Let's see, checking the chat. Thank you for the great talk. Someone, an audience member says, more data equals more problems. Do you see a danger in this accelerated race towards big data science everywhere? Access to resources, cloud infrastructures, even learning resources is at risk of being available only to the well-funded?
Yes, that is a massive risk that we all have to face. How do we make it more equitable? So one of the things is the knowledge of machine learning at this point is available to almost everybody. There's probably a YouTube video, bunch of PDFs you could actually study, or just sit there and invent the things in your head. What is harder for you to do is get access to the scale of computing you would need to run the models. And so this is where I think we need new systems of funding to actually, maybe we all sign up and say, we need this much, and each person gets to have 30 minutes of some kind of cloud system to make this thing occur. And I think a lot of the cloud providers have programs with universities that if you're a student, you get access to X amount of cloud time. And I think people are also beginning to think outside of formal education, because everybody that is a learner, that's a student, is not in a university environment. So if you're a self-learner, you're working at a boot camp. And so I think those are where we should actually put our effort into opening those doors, that if I'm not using a canonical path, I should still be able to get X% of credits on your cloud system.
Like how, again, this is democratizing data, democratizing access, making it equitable to people, just like sort of open source is really trying to do for contributing to code.
Yeah, and then even when we talk about the data, one of the things that was revolutionary for me to see is the fact that during this pandemic, data all of a sudden became something your sister, your aunt. If we're in data science, this is not new to us. But people who were not in our industry were seeing that dashboard from Johns Hopkins. And I saw many countries on board into GitHub pushing CSV files. And they're just pushing their CSVs, and now anybody could do analysis on top of that data. And we want to continue to make sure that that is easy and available, because one of the most difficult things is the tools can be so cumbersome that it deters you from sharing data. And we also have a part in education in helping people who can go and collect the data. So young people who are they're fairly healthy could go to a hospital and help the hospital collect data, things like that. And there are some people who feel like some of this data is extremely sacred, it should not be shared. But I have the philosophy that whatever you bring to light and has more eyes in it is the best path towards safety. Because the more people can see it, then the more of us can have innovative ways of making sure that it is safe. Versus if you put it behind some cluster somewhere, and then we won't know whether it has been compromised and all this stuff.
So what about interpreting the data? Even if we have the data out there, you see tons of different dashboards that may have different conclusions from the data. How does that play into the system, into democratizing the knowledge?
That is the act of doing science in the open. There is no, remember the last part of the scientific process, argumentation. We all have this aggregated data source. We're all going to use this data source. We each run our own analysis. And I say, this is what I found. And I share that publicly, and you disagree with me. We can have a dialogue on how I got my findings. First of all, you should be able to reproduce it to see if it's valid. I might have written something in my code that has made it bad, that I'm not able to catch. So you can help me do code review and help me see this variable was off by this much. That's why you're getting what you're getting. Or have you considered X, Y, and Z? My data set I augmented with all this other stuff that you're not thinking about that has impact on the simulation. So I would suggest you go collect this kind of data from this region. Oh, you have this stuff. Our school year is not X amount of weeks. Our school year is this. So therefore you ran it based on the school year that didn't match our country. So things are not going to be the same. We have these public holidays that you don't have. So all this dialogue, this knowledge comes to the surface. And at some point, we'll be able to jointly agree that we've exhausted every part of this thing. We've reproduced it several times. We've waited. We've seen the simulations actually support what we see. Over a couple of years of doing this kind of stuff, we will all come to the conclusion that this is in fact the case. So now the public is seeing us do science in the open. And I think that's the part that a lot of people got confused about, because they thought science was decided.
I saw that all the time teaching math as well. Mm-hmm. Everything's been decided and you're just teaching me foregone conclusions, and there's no research to do or no different interpretations either. So switching subjects just a little bit, can you tell us anything about maybe better support for notebooks in GitHub? We already have rendering.
This was coming.
What about Jupyter and GitHub?
I knew this was coming. So rendering, I mean, we all use GitHub and we have to render our notebooks. So that's one of the challenges, get rendering done. There is going to be better support as our community becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So Jupyter Notebooks has been around for 10 years. It started off in Berkeley. It was a bunch of few people using it. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, you read that article by Paul Roma saying that he's going to be using Jupyter Notebooks to do his Nobel Prize winning work. And everybody's like, oh my God. And so we're seeing this work. And Jupyter is becoming part and parcel of how a lot of teams do their work. And data science, the contingent of data scientists on GitHub platform is growing. It's growing. It's growing. As it continues to grow, we'll be able to actually fund and support that contingent of people, because pretty much in 10 years, if things continue the way they continue, we are going to be a very big contingent of Jupyter users. So we hear you. We are going to engage. We're going to fund it. It's not going to be overnight.
And let me
it's not overnight, but we are we know what's going on.
Let me be the first to tell you how much we really appreciate already the support in GitHub for Jupyter Notebooks. It's been already amazing in pushing forward science and in pushing forward people working in the Jupyter ecosystem. We really appreciate it. Another question, how much more education do you think an average person needs to gain before participating in a discussion about science, like we've talked about?
This is a very broad question because I don't know how much education they have.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things we need to allow to occur is the tolerating of ignorance. So actually make people feel relaxed to say, I want to engage in this conversation. I don't know this, I don't know that, I don't know this. Can you tell me why you think this is? To allow me to freely expose my ignorance so that I can learn. So you don't need additional education. You need an environment that allows ignorance to emerge so it can be corrected.
I think that is quotable. Many of the things you said are quotable. That is amazing.
And we don't have that right now because most people are like, nobody wants to appear stupid or ignorant. And we've had this negative connotation to bewilderment of saying, I actually don't know. If you don't have a tight relationship, positive relationship with ignorance and bewilderment, because if you don't know, the natural reaction is to ask a question. The kinds of questions you ask is going to be very limited. But if you have a very positive relationship with ignorance, the questions you ask are going to be so rich that you will finally get the knowledge you need. Science starts by asking questions. So allowing people to truly ask questions without fear of reprimand is the most important thing we can do to move science forward.
So how do we do that? I totally agree with you. The most brilliant
scientist I knew. Don't jump on them on Twitter. Don't don't attack people for asking questions. Ooh, that's a dumb question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Somebody might be out here really doesn't believe in climate science. And all of a sudden you tag that as a part of their identity and you add all these extra things to it. They don't believe in climate science. How about having a conversation? Why? And they tell you all these reasons. And then you support, you give them information, you help them actually see. The work of a scientist is to hold the candle and let you see, not to tell you what to see, but just to hold the candle and then you can see with your own eyes and interpret.
I love your attitude. I love your philosophy here. Go ahead, Lorena.
Yes, if I may. Omoju, wonderful presentation. And I have several thoughts that you said some things that are challenging. And 3 of them really rise to my priority list. And let me start with the one that is most dear to me, which has to do with education. You said, how do we train scientists and engineers so they are knowledgeable and competent in software engineering and data science? So I have a dream. And in this dream, every single course in engineering is taught with Jupyter Notebooks, like every single one. From the moment you start learning about using Jupyter Notebooks, and we teach calculus, and we teach linear algebra, and we teach thermodynamics, and we teach, fluid mechanics and biology, and every single course using Jupyter Notebooks. So
I don't think it's a crazy dream. I honestly, learning calculus without Jupyter Notebooks, I mean, obviously by the time I was learning calculus, they didn't exist. But now it's like that's calculus, Jupyter Notebook, it should be just.
Like we could bring the ideas to the eyes of our students so much more clearly. But yet, here's a challenge. You have 90% of professors who don't know how to use Jupyter Notebooks. And the university, it turns out, is very slow. And if you want to make changes in the curriculum, you have to, write a proposal, put it in the committee. It takes another year before the committee decides, and then another year before you can make a change in the bulletin. And by then, everything has changed. So how can we reconcile the fact that we are moving so fast and there's so much innovation? You look at all the presentations at the Jupyter conference and it's just so much innovation. And yet at the university, everything is at the turtle pace. How are we going to give our students this ability and this access to this wonderful tool?
So Lorena, the question stems from at the university. Why have we frozen the university in the 18th and 19th century when we know that online communities are the unit of existence for the 21st century? So we are basically we're stuck in the time of where people had to wear those gowns in Oxford and Cambridge. No, we don't need to do any of that anymore. We need to free ourselves from the boundaries of the university. The university is going to go through this process, and it's going to be 36 months before they allow this thing to occur. I think you start teaching these courses. I don't know what, there are some universities that there are some courses that are on the curriculum, and then there are some other courses like the D courses, the courses that are not part of the curriculum. You do the innovation in that direction. And then the university itself will see that majority of their students are over here, and they will then come along. Until then, if you go the canonical route, it's not going to work.
It's a big challenge.
It's going to be 48 months, and then by then, the kids have actually graduated from undergrad. You can effect change. So you have to do it outside of the curriculum, but still on the university.
Mm-hmm.
And just be satisfied with you would teach fluid dynamics the canonical way, and then you teach the real fluid dynamics in the evening online.
Here's a question. Is real educational innovation just not going to come from universities, not going to happen at universities? Do we really have to go rogue?
Yes, we have to go rogue. Or you need an existential threat to occur. And we are living in a moment of existential threat.
We are, but the
universities they've gone online. Before, they were not going to go online. Now they've gone online. Everybody has to go online. No, this is no longer something that we are fighting for. They've all gone online. So now it's time to move forward. Keep on pushing.
Yes. It's incredible because even now, forced to go online, there's still a resistance to adopt the modern tools. There's still like, oh, I'm going to be stuck in the Blackboard, the walled garden of the learning management system where everything is inside and I don't publish the materials or anything. Nothing is in the open. So there's still a long way to go. Okay,
there is.
The second challenge that you brought up with regards to reproducible research, the ability to work and do science in the open, which of course I'm a big proponent of and have been for years. Here's the challenge you highlighted in passing, like it was not a big thing. The incentives. What are the incentives for researchers to work reproducibly today when at the moment it takes more, if you do reproducible research, like I try to do, it takes more time to publish, it's not recognized, it's seen as like some sort of alternative thing that Lorena is doing because she's crazy. How are we going to, where are the incentives that we can provide for the community to move in this direction because they feel it's going to be good for them?
This might sound very like Silicon Valley Pollyanna. You're already crazy. Stay crazy. You have to realize that your incentive structure is not going to be the same. What you're working to do is very different from what they are working to do. You're working to bring a new paradigm. You are a trailblazer. A trailblazer is a person that goes ahead by themselves, nobody else is there. You can't expect people to support you because you're literally blazing a trail. No, but you have the machete, you're hacking your way and you're creating a trail. When you created that trail and it's solid, people will come after you, but you will be working alone by yourself in the future. But you exist in the future while they're living in the past. That's what it's going to be. And it's okay because some of us are trailblazers.
So
the more we accept that, the better quality of our lives will be, and we will be able to actually achieve our goals faster. Don't try to convince people. Do it, show it, they will come along. Google, for the first time, has this thing that they're saying, perhaps they don't need to hire people from four-year universities. They're creating some alternate paths to onboarding employees. That is a radical thing. So people are starting to do things like that. And I think us who do this kind of science need to start doing our science outside of those contexts. There are most science funding now, the science that's basically changing the way we live our lives is usually coming out of industry.
There is a lot coming out of industry.
They are the ones building the tools. They are the ones building the supercomputer for you to use, democratizing access to the supercomputer. Whereas before, the supercomputers were only available to labs that were part of a consortium. Now, anybody with enough money can get access to a supercomputer. They are the ones democratizing these things.
So in
the follow up in the questions in the chat if you want to take that, Jason.
So we have
somebody says it was regarding to the branching of the teaching, and the comment is in a Git version analogy, Omoju, are you branching classes or building completely new forks that have their own life?
I think we are branching because ultimately we want them to be merged back into main. And eventually that branch might, maybe main merges into that branch and rename the branch main. But you want to, it's teaching and learning. So you want to illuminate a different path. So you want people to always have access to what you're doing. They don't have to do it, but they need to be able to have access to it just in case they want to, they can then merge into it easily. You don't want to go off on your own and where nobody knows. You want to be able to illuminate while not being held back.
So while you're talking about this huge sort of seismic shift that we're already progressing along so that we can be wise, is there any pitfalls or things we should be wary of, that we should be wise, that we should, mistakes that could be made, or risks that we're, what should we be wise about and wary about?
Always make sure that whatever solution you build has inclusion built into it. Don't assume that your user can see, your user can read, your user has, think about all the different kinds of people in the world and ask yourself, will they be able to get access to this? Will they be able to get access to that? And the things that you're building, see if you can even go further. Does it have to be English first? Is there a way that you can do translation easily? All those kinds of things. Just assume that you're building for the world and not necessarily building for the people that you can see. I think that is a very, very clear thing for us to put in our minds. We are building for the world. Our students, our learners are not going to come from Berkeley. They're going to come from all over the world. So I may not be able to speak all their languages, but I should build a system in a way that if somebody can do translation, or there's an API that we can use for machine translation, it's easily pluggable, and that could occur. Build as a platform so other people can extend it and make it more robust.
Excellent thought. Excellent thought. Thank you so much. One last question. We've talked a lot about science and moving science towards open reproducibility, inclusiveness and things like that. And you've used open source as a model for where science can go. What's next for open source? Where do we need to move forward as open source, as an open source community?
We need to make sure, I think one of the biggest things for open source is putting the entire open source community on the same platform. Because right now it's distributed on multiple platforms. There's Discord, there's a mailing list, there's GitHub issues, there's this, there's that. The home of an open source project should be one thing, so it's easy for you to actually get access to everything. You can plan your events, you can do things like that. And a little plug, we're building a thing called GitHub Discussions that we mentioned, and that's one of the reasons why we're building it. We wanted to be the home of open source. And then on top of that, open source really needs to go very hard on machine learning to help to triage and manage volumes of things, because burnout of maintainers is very, very real. And in order for you to reduce that, you want to do as much automation as possible so you don't lose the love of actually doing. You want to remain a maintainer because you like to write the code. You don't want to spend all your time triaging issues. And always have a plan of succession, because at some point, maybe you get older and you have children and they need you. So always have a plan of succession. How can a thing exist beyond you? Build with the assumption of, in 5 years, I should not be the major maintainer.
Excellent.
So to add just one little thing to that, you did also mention, that was my third challenge that I bubbled to the surface of your presentation. You said 90% of Fortune 500 companies use open source in their stack. But still open source, needs people, needs funding, and you still have those maintainers, big fundamental projects that have a bus factor of 3 or 4, and so these Fortune 500 companies need to be buttressing this whole system, and because if they're relying on it, shouldn't they really be investing in it?
I have one thing to say. Come to this year's GitHub Universe in December. Just come to GitHub Universe in December, and perhaps some answers will be there for you. GitHub Universe 2020 December. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm gonna say.
And with that teaser, I think we'll have to close. Thank you so much, Omoju.
Thank you all.
We really appreciate your insights and your thoughts about where we are and where we can go. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
For all the conference participants, Lightning Talks will take a 15-minute break.
Stop the recording before you end it.
Let's stop the recording first.
And we have Lightning Talks.